Okay, I got a 2006 Mazda 5 and I've been hearing a noise as I'm driving along, and it's kind of a squeaking noise or crunching noise, and I've pinned it to this lower control arm bushing right here, the rear bushing. And you can hear that crunching, that clicking. Yeah. So that bushing's showing some wear, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to either see if I can find an assembly with the lower control arm with the bushing on it, or just change the bushing. And there, we're getting the same noise. This is the driver's side. And I've traced it to that rear bushing on the lower control arm. So both sides are making a crunching sound when there's a load on the wheel. So those are going to be changed. Okay, so I got those lower control arms put in, and I also put in the anti-sway bar links here. They have a little pivot on the bottom and on the top, so they say that those wear out, so I did those at the same time. And what I discovered while I was in here is that there's a leak in the boot on this side of the CV axle. And so what I looked it up, and to get a new CV boot here, and it was about $45 altogether with shipping. And then I looked at, you're still going to have to take out the shaft to fix it. So I looked online, and you could buy a whole new, brand new replacement CV axle, the whole side here, for double that price. So just over $80. I got that delivered. So that's what I'm about to do here. I'm going to change that outer passenger CV axle. Let me just take another look around here, get you a better look here. So as you'll remember there in the other video, I had there was wear in this lower control arm bushing up in here. So these are back on. I did both sides and got that in. And I saw this leak. It wasn't so bad until I went and tried it. I drove it again after I put these lower control arms in. And as you can see, it's leaking everywhere, so I thought maybe best to just get that dealt with. So I'm just about to take this apart and change that axle shaft. Okay, so I got that apart. So what I've done is I decided I didn't want to fight with the rotor in place and the brake caliper in place, even though you can do it. You can get the axle shaft out of the knuckle with it on. I decided I didn't want to mess with that, so I took the caliper off and I hung it up with a piece of wire so it doesn't put any tension on the hose. And then what I did was I took the rotor off, and I had this straight, and what I used was I just had a piece of steel and I jammed it between the nuts here. And then what I did was I used 1.25 inches. It's probably metric, but 1.25 inches fit it really tight, so there must be an equivalent. And so I put 1.25 inch socket on there, and I used a pipe. And I just I broke that loose. And so here's the old axle compared to the new one. And the only thing I see different on this one seems to have a dust cap on it, and this one doesn't. Okay, and then down here I'll show you. So here's the slider pins for the caliper, and you'll need a 7mm Allen wrench to get those out. And here's the bolt that holds the lower ball joint into the lower control arm. I used two 14mm wrenches to get that out, and I found it was a little tight. So what I did was I used a cold chisel, So what I did was I took it and I put it down between the split in the knuckle and hit it a few times with a hammer to open up it enough so that the ball joint would, I could tap it down gently. I just tapped on the lower control arm here gently, and it just popped right out. Okay, and then like I say, just to recap what's sitting on the plywood here, is there's the rotor and there's the bracket, the hardware that holds the caliper on, and those were there's two 17mm bolts holding those on. Okay, so you can see where it attaches, and I just went in there and took a hammer and tapped on right here, a couple of raps, and it just pulled out. This came right out, and there it is compared to the new one. Now I just went and looked in the box. There's supposed to be a clip. There's a clip that sits on that shaft in there. I'll show you in a second. And usually they provide one, and I didn't see one. There's none. There's not another. And there's no new clip. Basically, there's a groove in the shaft that mates with this, and the clip helps hold this in place. And so I guess I'll have to reuse the old one. So I'll get that out, clean it up, and I'll show you. And then the procedure is just going to be make sure the clip's on the shaft, and I'll push this back in, and I'll put that back in the steering knuckle, and I'll tighten it down, and then it's assembly, same reverse of the removal. So yeah, here I am underneath, and I see that the retaining clip is in fact, it's intact, and it's in the groove on the shaft that it mates with. So I'm just going to clean this up, put a little grease on it, and put the axle shaft in. Now just while I'm under here, I'll show you. There's like a steady bearing here, and there's another shaft that runs back over to the transmission. This stays in, and it originates back here at the transmission. So we didn't have to change the axle shaft on this side, which is the passenger side. We didn't have to take the shaft out of the transmission. So what happens is it makes a connection right here at the steady bearing. Okay, you see that? Okay, so I've got these splines cleaned up and greased, and the clip is in there, and I've got the axle in place. Now, I'm just going to see if I can feed that on there. And I might have to use two hands here. Okay, so I pushed it in just by hand, and it went on. It just, with two hands on it, and I just made the shaft straight, pushed it on, good firm push, and it went right on. Initially I was concerned that there might be a master spline on there, but I turned it all the way around. I went in and put the car in neutral, and I used just the tip of this onto the first bit of the splines, that side of the clip, and I was able to turn the shaft all the way around. And I looked at the splines. There's no master splines on this male shaft that sticks out, so it didn't matter, what orientation it was in to go on there. So it was just a matter of getting over that clip. There's a bit of resistance that the clip puts up, and once you're over that, it just slides right in. So there's that. Okay, I've got the splines greased, and I've got this end of the axle shaft pointed into the knuckle. So I'm just going to try and wiggle that up in there. And there, it goes right in. A bit of a push back there. There. And there it goes. Okay, I got that in there. The axle came through the knuckle. I don't have the nut on it yet. Okay, so there's the old nut, and here's the new nut. And if you've never used one of these before, they have a built-in lock built into it. And how you do it is there's on the end of the axle shaft there's like a keyway cut, and what happens is when you get the nut tight enough, then you take a punch or a screwdriver and you push this top rim over into the keyway, and that acts as a lock, so the nut doesn't just roll back on its own. You can see this one here, the old one, This is where I undid it to get the nut off. I pushed this out of the way. Okay, so you'll see that here in a minute when I put this on. Okay, so that goes on there, and we'll get it tightened down. Okay, the torque for this is for this nut is 175 to 202 foot-pounds. As you can see, I've got a pipe jammed in here between the studs. So there. And we'll try it right here. Just come onto there like that. And see. Get it in there. Try another spot so we're not pounding on the same exact spot. And then you want to make sure, number one, you don't break that piece out, because then you won't have a lock. You also want to make sure you get it down in there. You want it down in there like that. You see how it's there. See, it's actually down. That part of it is down in the keyway. So this nut, you know, if it became loose, with it down in there like that, that part of it, it's not going to freely just spin off the car. You know, it's not just going to come undone. So it's got to be down in there like that. And like I say, with any of these videos, this is more entertainment than anything. So if you don't feel confident doing any of this stuff yourself under your own steam, then by all means take it to a mechanic that can do this stuff for you. Okay, I got everything together. Got the brake caliper back on there, the rotor, everything's tightened down. I put the bolt through here, torque that down. One that holds the ball joint into the knuckle. And everything looks good, so I'm going to put the wheel on it and take it for a little drive. And we'll check back with you here in a minute. So here we go. I've got it all back together. Got the wheels on, and going to take it for a little test drive here. Wow, the battery's a little low. Okay. Alright, here we go. Oh, wait now. Gosh, it's in gear there. It doesn't want to go. I must have disconnected something. Let me go take a look. Oh, after all that, I hope I didn't. I must have not lined up the splines or something. I don't know what happened. Take a look. Oh, it's still up on the jack stands and the jack. Okay, that'll explain it.